when my female leadership clientele come through my door is that they're thrust into these leadership positions, and all of a sudden that means they're in the spotlight and it's time to be visible. And there's something about that spotlight and that visibility that just pulls up every single insecurity that we have from underneath the rug.
There are so many ways that we step into the spotlight as leaders and for women who are executives. As soon as we step into that spotlight, we are so aware of every single pair of eyes that is upon us and the expectations that come with that. So it suddenly becomes about so much more than this one moment.
Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project, changing the way the game is played. This podcast helps purpose-driven leaders unlock their highest potential so that they can play their biggest impact game. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project, changing the way this game is being played. I'm your host, Susan Hobson, joined by my new co-host that I'm so excited to introduce us all today to Shelley West and Liane Wansbrough, sitting to my left and my right, ready to get this party started. And boy, oh boy, is it going to be a party today. We've got a fabulous guest that we are so excited to introduce you all to. So Liane, I'm going to pass you the puck. Since you were the one to introduce us to our fabulous guest, would you let our audience know who Paige is and what brought her to this show in the first place?
Absolutely. So it is, I'm super happy to introduce you to Paige Ray. So Paige runs an award-winning photo and creative studio that's headquartered in LA, but she travels all across the US working with creative brands and entrepreneurs. Her work's been featured in Variety Magazine, The Hollywood Reporter, Huffington Post, and Glamour. And Paige describes herself as a creative catalyst who understands the power of a headshot as a springboard to visibility and building an authoritative brand for founders, for CEOs, executives, and creators. And we're going to dive into that today, as well as discuss the obstacles that so many of us female leaders will be able to relate to, which is why do we dislike so many of our photos? And why is it that we struggle to feel comfortable and confident with our public facing image? So welcome, Paige. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here today. I'm hoping that we can get more and more women to feel good on camera, to get comfortable on camera. It's a very difficult thing. I like to start by acknowledging that. Like, it's hard. It's really hard, isn't it?
Oh, yeah,
it is. I'd love to kick us off by just let's start at the beginning for you, Paige. I know you've been at your work as a photo creative for some time. Did it take you by surprise when you first started, taking pictures and images of women, that they would have such a response upon seeing what you thought were probably their most beautiful photos, and they would be sitting there like, what? So tell us about that.
I recognize it as such a kind of back and forth struggle that feels really common. I would say that about 90% of the people that I work with come to me and say, I don't feel good on camera. I'm nervous. I'm awkward. I don't know what to do with my hands. It's such a common experience. And I feel the same way. I've been a photographer for 10 years. And for the last 4 years, I've been really dedicated to myself getting in front of the camera at least twice a year so I can stay present with what it feels like to do this. And every time I get in front of the camera, I go, I don't know what to do. I forgot how do I do this? It's, my mind blanks. And so it is really hard. And exactly what you're talking about, I do often see when I'll take a photo of a woman and I'll go, oh my goodness, she is so beautiful. She is glowing. People are going to see this and be inspired by her presence. And then I see a disconnect, and I do sometimes see women go like, oh, I don't like that about this photo, or I don't like my arm, or I don't like my chin. And it feels like such a major disconnect, but one that I so deeply understand. And it's so easy to empathize with that and to sit with it, because I've never found it useful to say, oh, no, you look beautiful. And of course I affirm that, but I also am so familiar with this is hard, isn't it? And then we talk through, tell me what's coming up for you. what is it that you're not, that you don't love right now? And that's an okay feeling to have.
I feel like this is everything that I also see when my female leadership clientele come through my door, is that they're thrust into these leadership positions, and all of a sudden that means they're in the spotlight and it's time to be visible. And there's something about that spotlight and that visibility that just pulls up every single insecurity that we have from underneath the rug, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, this is exactly what you're describing, is the same experience when they're actually in the spotlight taking a picture, right? So why is that? What exactly is your analysis or understanding over a decade of research now that you've got as an entrepreneur in this space? So what is it about the spotlight that pulls on all of our insecurities, Paige?
Oh my gosh. Well, so spotlight can be like you're talking about, it can be photo, it can be video, it can be getting on stage, it can be leading a boardroom, it can be writing a memo that 500 people on your team are going to read. There are so many ways that we step into the spotlight as leaders and for women who are executives. And I would say that suddenly, as soon as we step into that spotlight, we are so aware of every single pair of eyes that is upon us and the expectations that come with that. So it suddenly becomes about so much more than this one moment. It becomes more than how do I get this pose right in a way that feels good, or how do I deliver a keynote in a way that's clear. Suddenly it becomes about the kind of resounding impacts of all of that we feel like are about to unfold from it, right? I get this pose right, and then I have a photo, and then it's going to be on a website viewed by thousands of people. Or I deliver a keynote, it'll be recorded with 1,000 people in the room who are also thinking about every word I say, right? So I think as women, we're bringing onto ourselves, or we can feel, it's not just eyes watching us, it's eyes thinking about us and what we're putting out there. And that is terrifying, no matter how long you've been doing it.
When we were in our 30s, 40s, 50s and getting into leadership positions, this is what I call out with my leaders, is if this is pulling up all those insecurities from under the rug, it's because it's time to mature out of that social self stage, right? In the maturation process. Most people don't realize that only 1/3 of adults actually make it into this stage of the adult maturation process known as self-authorization. You're not a leader until you learn how to see yourself. That's what we love to say to our leaders, because where we differentiate in our leadership development is that we start with self-leadership.
Hey, I have a question for you. I'm just curious about sort of almost like the generational curse, right? So let's take it to like, millennials, or let's Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, like what are the differences that you're seeing in terms of how women are showing up? Is it better? Where does that actually sit?
Oh gosh, that is such a good question. So focusing on the 90% of people that come to me and say, I feel really awkward on camera, because there is a 10% of people that say like, no, I don't care, I feel great. And I'm thrilled for that.
The anomalies, the outliers. Yeah.
Right? But focusing on the people who feel awkward on camera, in terms of generational, I do think that like the older we are, actually, sometimes we get more comfortable faster. And I do think, I'm in my 40s and I feel myself letting go of the criticism that I would give to myself about my body or my image or what I looked like. And thank goodness for that. Like, what a huge relief. I'm finally getting into a place of like, I love myself. I accept myself. I am thrilled for other people to experience me and see me. And with my clients who are also in midlife, I see a more of a like, it's just another day, it's just another shoot. It's another part of what I'm doing, right? It becomes a building block rather than a full statement that takes over your life when you do a photo shoot. Not that younger people aren't confident in front of the camera. They certainly are. And having been on social media since such a young age, they do it so differently, which is also really interesting. But I do notice that a lot of my clients who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s find ways to be comfortable on camera if they can release themselves just a little bit. And I do find that really, really fun. I see more personality. I see more style a lot of the time, which I also think is really, really fun. But There's also, of course, everybody's concern about like, okay, what's this lighting going to make me look like? Is it going to catch the texture in my face? You know, what do I need in terms of makeup, right? And I do think that's interesting because, you know, if you are right now, if you're 22 and you spent your whole life looking at your face on a screen and knowing how to do your makeup from YouTube tutorials, your experience in front of the camera is dramatically different from somebody who is in their 50s or 60s who is used to maybe doing one shoot a year. And maybe that's a headshot session. Maybe that's a family shoot. Maybe that was wedding photos that you got done 10 years ago, right? 20 years ago. So the frequency of it is also something that is just so interesting generationally.
Yeah,
I feel like,
And I
oh,
know we
sorry,
all
go
are
ahead.
dying to dig
We're
into
all
Paige right now.
jumping
So
in.
I'm going to be quiet. I asked my question. You go ahead. No, we're all like this. Okay,
You
go
go,
ahead.
Susan. I'll go after you.
I was just going to point out the fact that in everything that you just described, it seems like the correlate here is the older we get, the more we know ourselves. And the more we know ourselves, usually that leads to more comfort in thyself, more acceptance in thyself. And I think that from our standpoint as leadership coaches, we know that that is the resistance that's coming up, right? When we're thrust into a spotlight, it's like, well, how well do you know yourself and how comfortable are you with that which you see and know? Yeah, we know that a lot of with the younger kids, they're still in the stage, at least with our teenage girls, of the maturation process towards adulthood, known as the social self, right? Which is all about their conditioning is who do I need to be so I can show up and be accepted by the tribe, right? So it's a lot of how they're filtering in terms of their decision making. But yeah, when we were in our 30s, 40s, 50s and getting into leadership positions, this is what I call out with my leaders is if this is pulling up all those insecurities from under the rug, it's because it's time to mature out of that social self stage, right? In the maturation process. Most people don't realize that only 1/3 of adults actually make it into this stage of the adult maturation process known as self-authorization. And that is we only arrive at that station in terms of our evolution if we have actually taken the time to know thyself and accept thyself, right? So I just think it's so fascinating in terms of how this is playing out with our younger generations, because yeah, obviously there's a lot more visibility a lot sooner on the play, right? In terms of they're showing up on social media. We didn't even have social media when we were their age. So I'm just curious in terms of how I'm just curious as a neuroscientist now, like, is this going to help them to evolve into that self-authorized stage a little bit sooner? Because I can totally see that that would be the case. And I actually find with the younger generations that they are more confident once they get into their 20s. Like this is what we're hearing from our senior leaders is that, yeah, this generation of workers and employees that are in their 20s and 30s, like they're not necessarily going for the same things that maybe we did back in the day with our leaders. But I think that's because maybe they're arriving in their authority a little bit sooner as a result. What do you think about that, Paige?
I think that is fascinating. And I do think that that will translate to visibility, right? Because so much of our visibility it sits in our mind in a place in relation to other people. And if you can be your number one authority right from the get-go, your experience on camera changes dramatically too, right?
Absolutely.
You don't need anyone else to tell you look good on camera. You already know because you are your first opinion. So I think that's fascinating. And I am also really curious where that meets the reality that we're in where we spend so much time looking at our faces on screen, but also the quality of cameras that we're using are so good. They pick up every detail. And what's so funny to me about that is if you over retouch something, it becomes unrealistic. But at the same time, if you do nothing to it and just leave it to your camera, it's also not fully realistic because it's picked up more detail than human eyes can actually see on their own. So it's not even without retouching, it's not fully what we see or how other people see us on top of that. So that to me is really interesting because we're getting a view of ourselves with modern cameras that it's so hard to see who we are, but that met with an authority earlier in life. I'm really interested to see where that goes.
Right? Like, I think either way you slice this cake, this is a fabulous exercise for us all to go through, because I think at the end of the day, you want to know where your insecurities lie, especially if you're an adult. You want to know what conditioning is still left in there, right? That's draining you of your power. In other words, the expectations that are informing who you need to be in said photograph. Right?
Yes.
In order to gain acceptance. But if you're trying to gain acceptance on the outside going in, well, you definitely want to know about that. That's a very fruitful exercise for us all, I think.
Absolutely.
Shelley and Liane, what were you going to chime in
Well,
there?
so
Second
I'm
ago?
really curious, just what we're talking about the younger generation and their comfort, obviously, on Snapchat and Insta, like, whatever the social media channels are that they're on. I won't pretend to know. So I have a 17, almost 18-year-old daughter. And one of the things that I have tried to talk to her about over the last few years is just recognizing that so many of the images that she does see on social media have been so heavily filtered that the person just doesn't look like that in real life, and it sets up very unrealistic standards. So on the one hand, we can kind of say, well, they're getting the comfort level that we never had in terms of like being visible at an earlier age, but there's still pretty heavy standard and expectation out there in relation to all these filters that can be used. And I guess I'm curious, have you had any pushback in the sense of a photographer where you have somebody who's so used to doctoring their image before they post it, and now suddenly they have to put the real deal out there, the real photo? I mean, sometimes there could be a real disconnect there.
Yes, you're 100% right. I've definitely had very intense requests for specific retouching, I think is the way that I think is the best way to put that. I have absolutely seen that. And I've seen that increase to a point where it's noticeable between me and other photographers. I know other photographers will see it. I've seen that increase a lot since 2020 specifically. And I think that that's with the rise of short form video. We are consuming so much more content than we're used to, and it's so heavily filtered. And we forget how heavily filtered it is, to the point where we think that's just how people look. And then we're trying to look like that in our photos and wondering like, why does my skin not look the same? Why does my face look so much whiter? That's my own personal insecurity, right? We start thinking that, when the truth is that like the images we're looking at and the video we're looking at is just filtered to begin with. And when you're, working with a professional camera, it's not retouched the same. It's not filtered the same. So it has definitely skewed how we think about people and how we think about how we should look. And this is a growing concern in my mind, because I am at a place now where I really want to see a lot more of our age in photos. As I age, I want to see it more in photos. I am just dying to see more women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s and above in media, on TV, in stories. I'm just dying to see it. I want to see people age. I want to see gray hair, because I'm getting a lot more gray hair. I want to see style evolve, because I want to know how I want my style to evolve. I think you're really putting your finger right on the pulse of it. And it is something that I've seen majorly shift.
And that's how we're going to reshape the collective consciousness right there, right? Because the more we accept our damn selves, the more we're going to change those industry standards. The more we're going to actually redefine what true beauty means, what it looks like in all the different shapes, flavors, sizes, and ages and stages of the trajectory, the timeline, right? I think that's the whole damn point of an exercise like this. In fact, just like it is for our female leaders who need to go through this exercise so that they can rid themselves of the insecurities that were never meant to be a lifetime sentence. Like, we're meant to stimulate their nervous system so that they could actually find themselves in a way where, yeah, they're proud of who they are, no matter what that looks like in comparisons to everybody else. Like, that's the space we're in, I know, in leadership, is that it's all about authenticity now, because if you're authentic, you're trustworthy. And that's the problem I have with these people who want headshots that are all buffed out, because please don't make that the image that you want people to trust, because it's not going to be trustworthy if it's not coming across authentically. There's so much power to that and resonance to that. And if we're talking leadership, that's important, right? Because that's where our influence comes from.
Absolutely. And I would tell, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. Just to Susan's point, right? Like I grew up in a day where, print and magazine were king, right? And, had the privilege and honor of running several magazines across my career. And, you know, I think it was a big shocking moment. I think I remember the first time seeing a cover production or an actual photo shoot and then seeing the end result. I like, and the amount of money that was spent on airbrushing and just making it and then bringing, and at that point, AI did not even exist, right?
Yeah.
So you take someone, you bring in their hips, and then all of a sudden their boobs are bigger, and it's just like, whoa, like I had the honor of seeing the actual shoot and then what the result was because that's what sold, right? And so I want to fast forward now to Pam Anderson. Let's just have a chat about her, right? Somebody who was, that goddess, that icon, the whole Baywatch, Pam, right? Everyone knew Pam. And then Pam shows up completely differently. And the rally around Drew Barrymore is on her show, no makeup. It just became this whirlwind of following and just kind of putting her on a pedestal. And I'm so anxious and so excited to see how that continues to evolve. And importantly, will it?
Well, talk about self-authorization, right? Her going in and writing, I believe she wrote her memoir. And then taking ownership over her story and over her image in such a very vulnerable way. I believe she's around my age. I think she's in her early 50s. And that's brave. That is brave. When you see what she represented in the public mind, the ownership that they had over her in terms of her image and taking obviously advantage of, as we're saying, the youth of her wanting to please and wanting to fit into obviously wanting to be successful and understanding what it was going to take and what was being asked of her. But to be able to turn that around.
Yeah, the iconic beauty, right? Like as we did put her on a pedestal and then her saying enough is enough and showing up as her authentic self, and it's accept me as I am or don't accept me at all. Like to your point, the
power in that
gravitas that takes, and not even just friends and family, but we're talking social and global and the entire world, right? Like, I hope we get to that point. I know I'm not there yet.
I'm not there yet, but I'm so inspired by her for sure. I've been watching it unfold. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Young girls do it.
And I'm just kind of obsessed with what Pamela Anderson is doing. And I love that Drew Barrymore did the same support on her show. And I remember a few years ago, Alicia Keys actually did the same thing. She said, I'm not putting makeup on anymore. And I love seeing it. I love seeing it so much. It does feel like such a dramatic turn from what we've done the last 10 years in terms of makeup and everything like that. Or I guess all time for what we've been doing forever. But yeah, I am obsessed with what Pamela Anderson is doing. I think it's so beautiful. I think it's a face I want to photograph. I want to photograph women in midlife, not too much makeup, loving their own beauty, loving their own age, loving their bodies. And I would tell anybody who is about to be in a leadership role, anybody who's hesitant to be in that spotlight, to be visible, when you're visible, whatever that looks like, whatever authentic is to you, makeup or no makeup, when you're visible, other people see you and go, okay, maybe I can do it. Like you become a leader in spirit for other people who also want to be visible. It makes such a huge difference. Because I really did notice almost as soon as I turned 40, I noticed, oh, the world will let me disappear if I don't fight to stay visible. It really does take such a dramatic shift when you move into midlife, and you do have to push harder to be seen, to be heard. So if there are more women on stage with you, if you're with these other women, it makes more space for everyone else to stay visible too throughout all stages of life.
Well, to your
Like,
point on that, like how do you stay visible and how do you take up space in this world, right? And still be
Yeah.
authentic. But I'm curious, I do have a question for you because I'm dying to know the answer. Has anybody ever walked into your studio and said, I want raw? Raw me, just raw. Has that ever happened yet?
Actually, yes. And so we sit down and I say, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to you, all natural, feeling raw? Because back to how our cameras shift dimension and perspective just through a lens and simply what the glass does with the light that it's taking in. I want to make sure that anybody that comes in and says that understands that, like, this is what lens distortion is, or this is what lights do to skin. And this is why we still maybe want to think about hair and makeup, but a specific kind of hair and makeup that feels undetectable when you look at your photos. So I have had people come in and say, I want nothing, I want raw. And then we do take a photo and so we can see in real time, what does it look like without anything? And lights do wash our skin out, and lens distortion really does have an effect on things. So it's not that we can't do it, but I do like to balance everything for people in their minds of what to expect from the camera and what the final effects can be. Yeah. But I support it. I fully support, come into my studio, do whatever
yeah.
you want.
I feel
Maybe
like
one day. Not right now, but maybe one day.
it's everything that we talk about in this high performance state too. It's like Goldilocks, right? It's like you don't want to be way
Mhm,
too much or not at all, but
mhm,
just right? In terms of being in alignment with maybe just the way that you show up every day in your day-to-day experience, you know? I feel like
mhm,
that's the call for our leaders listening is this piece around what you just said. Every time we as leaders, in this case, we're talking about female leaders who get into that self-authorization and just open the kimono in their authenticity, right? Like,
mhm,
I want us leaders to be conscious of that choice that we make at that critical moment, right? Because if we are stepping into the spotlight, and in this context, we're saying leaders carry all this influence. We got all these young ladies looking up to us, right? That are informing their expectations about giving themselves permission to show up in these ways as well. So I know that this is going to be a massive part of our legacy as female leaders, because this is what we talk about on the show a lot too, right? Like we are the first generation of female leaders that are getting access like we are to the spotlights we are. And I want us to be conscious about that in terms of our legacy. We have a chance to reshape this collective consciousness in and around what it means to show up as a female in the spotlight. And we are in the process of redefining that as we speak. So I really hope we can be conscious to that and not just rinse and repeat all this programming that we've been talking about that prevents us from accessing this self-authorization, you know? I think that one single choice holds the power to impact oh so much, not just for our daughters, but for generations to come.
mhm.
Well, I think
Absolutely.
we're at a good place in time too. I mean, if we just go back to the Pam Anderson example and look at her as taking the lead on this, and she really has gotten so, so much in terms of praise and, positive feedback around what she's doing. I think she's been on a couple of magazine covers. And, the conversation around her, as far as I've seen, has been supportive. And
Mm-hmm.
that's different. So if we go back to, the early 2000s, for example, the way that the media was able to talk about women, the type of languaging that they use, the picking apart of female bodies and faces and all. I mean, it's unbelievable, really, when you go back, even if it's disconcerting sometimes when you see movies back from that time and how women were just openly objectified in the movies. And it was just kind of like funny, right? And so I do think that what is acceptable now has changed. I mean, Paige, what do you think about that? Because obviously, you being in your 40s, I'm Gen X and you're a millennial along with Susan, and Shelley, and just how that collective conversation, let's say, has changed. What's acceptable now versus what was acceptable then? Because I think as women, like we were right to fear visibility because of what we saw happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so
Great point.
interesting because I do see a lot of conversations rehashing the way conversations happened in the early 2000s. And I'm glad that we're rehashing it. I'm glad we're going back and saying, you know what, the way we talked about this starlet or this person was not at all informed by real experiences and an understanding of their humanity. And Bridget Jones, I think, is such a good example. The new movie's about to come out, but I remember when the first movie came out in the very early 2000s, and I remember reading the book at the same time. And she steps on this scale and talks about herself very negatively at a specific weight. And I remember watching that and going like, well, I definitely weigh more than what that is on this scale. Like, what is this movie saying about me? And at a time when, you know, I was a teenager in the early 2000s, I was already feeling the pressure of everything so thin all of the time. And I do feel like the conversation's swinging back that direction this last year or so, which I find a little bit worrisome. I've got my eye on it, but I do think that we are so much more curious about other people's experiences and the fact that everybody lives such a different experience, and our ability to talk about it in such a more community-minded manner these days, that I'm not worried about that kind of feeling coming back from the early 2000s. But I do think that we just are so much more open and so much more like seeing that like this one way is not the only way. There are so many ways, and that is a good thing.
Well, on
Oh,
that
yeah.
note, actually, I'm the reverse. Sorry, I'm the opposite, not reverse. I'm the opposite, right? Because coming from the corporate world, let's just call it, right, where you're supposed to be buttoned
Mhm.
up and, professional, let's just talk about typical businesswoman, hair tied back, very minimal makeup because you're in, let's call it the boys club, right? So you have to show up a certain way.
Mhm.
As I started to age and go through my career and actually elevate in terms of my position, I actually started to drop weights of other people's opinion. And I
Mhm.
started showing up as who I wanted to be. I'm a girly girl. I love makeup. I love hair, as you can tell. Like I'm me. And I've actually embraced it more versus doing this to it.
Mhm.
I've actually said, I enjoy this. This makes me feel good about myself. And I actually don't care what anybody else thinks. I don't care the way I'm dressed right now. If you don't like it, that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. But that's now how I'm starting to take up space in the world, is not worry about what other people think or be dictated by what society is telling me I should or should not do. Don't wear makeup, and you're just constantly doing this ping pong. I'm at a point in my life now where I can be in a corporate position and still be who I want to be. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Can I ask you a question about this?
Sure.
Because I love what you just said. And when I was still working in 9 to 5s, so the first 10 years out of college, I was in a 9 to 5. And the thinking was very much like if you wanted to move forward or be part of the boys club, you had to kind of dress like the guys, bring your voice down to a lower register, right? Talk like the guys, like that kind of thing. So I love hearing the opposite. You know what? I want to be a girly girl that gets ahead. And so I would love to hear like what kind of when you said, you know what, I'm going to embrace this. I'm going to be me. What kind of effect that had? Did you like rocket further ahead?
100%.
Mhm.
100%. And I came into my own, like I started to drop, Susan, go into the imposter syndrome deep. Um, I've had the benefit of being coached by Susan. But it just allowed me to just take up that space in the world for myself, right? And not for other people. I
Mhm.
just stopped waking up in the morning and going, okay, what should I wear today versus
Mhm.
what do I want to wear today? Right? Regardless of what that outfit is, I used to stress about it the night before, right? Going into big corporate environments, going, okay, what am I going to wear to work tomorrow? And you're just
Mhm.
like, you're freaking out about it. And we had discussions all the time. Lots of women the night before, what are you wearing tomorrow? Like it was a little bit insane, right? Where you just drop that and I just start being me and I walk into a closet and say, this is what I want to wear, not what I'm either told. No one ever told me to wear anything, but not what I should wear. You know what I mean? And that as I started to age and as I started to grow in my career, I just started to drop it, drop, 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 drop. And you're going to accept me, just like Pam on the other side of the spectrum. You are going to accept me for who I am or just don't accept me at all.
And that was the TSN turning point, as we call it in Shelley's coaching process, right? Like any of our coaching processes as females ascending in our growth game, right? It's like we finally realize that the more we accept and respect our damn selves, the more the room is going to accept and respect our damn selves. And by the way, how many resources does that free up when you're no longer consumed by the shoulds and the have tos and the musts and the can'ts and the how much time and energy and focus goes down that damn drain for females when they're stuck in that social self-conditioning? This is what I really lean on in my leadership coaching with women, because I know you're not free and expansive and resourceful and like really being able to put those resources in the direction of what actually matters, right? In terms of everything that you're trying to do on your mission as a leader. I love this conversation. I feel like we could go for days on this riff, ladies. This is so ripe and full of so many vital Leadership 2.0 concepts. The place I want to land this plane today, Paige, is with our favorite question here at the Leadership Launchpad Project, which is, what do you, when you envision yourself all the way up and to the right aspirationally in that rocking chair, and you look back thinking, did I really make it count on this mission of mine? Like, what do you want the legacy of all of this to be for you someday?
I think about that all the time. So thank you for asking that. I think about that all of the time. I am constantly doing checks for myself. If this were my last day to get to do any of this, have I done what I want to do? And what I want to do is, can we make every woman's voice heard? Can every woman be seen in the way that she wants to be seen and experienced and perceived? And that's a pretty big task, but the more of us who are out there putting a stake in the ground and saying, I'm here, you can't get rid of me. I'm going to be loud about what I am, who I am, and what I want to do. If I can keep doing that, if I can keep making a space where it's doable, right? That's my goal. Is a lot of women come in and it feels opaque to step into a photo studio and get an outfit and hair and makeup team and a pose and feel good. And then what do you do with the photos? If I can make a space in the world where all of those questions are answered and you feel like you see a true representation of yourself, once you see those final photos, then I'll feel like I've done my job. And even though I've worked with probably about 200 women at this point, it doesn't feel like enough. So maybe the answer is like, not yet. I still got to keep going. I've got another 10 or 20 years and see if I'll be lucky enough to work with another few hundred women. But I do think it's important. I think that it's easy to think like, oh, it's just photos or it's just video or it's just something that I have to do. But seeing yourself is important. Witnessing yourself is important. I think witnessing yourself as art is important. And letting other people witness you and take you in and take in your message is something that can change the world, even when you think that it's not doing anything. It's doing something. I promise that. So I hope that's a good answer.
We know that that's true based on this conversation today. I think this is why we're so aligned and why we were so excited to have you on our show, because it completely aligns with our mission here at Team Elite, right? Like, we're trying to change the way this game's being played by reshaping this collective consciousness in and around what it actually means to be a leader. And so, as you can see in both of our worlds, you're not a leader until you learn how to see yourself. That's what we love to say to our leaders, because where we differentiate in our leadership development page is that we start with self-leadership. So we start with the exact same assignment you do, right? Is like just figuring out, do you see yourself? Or do you only see this conditioned version of yourself that is false and was created for social survival?
Yes.
Right? I think it's the exact same exercise you're running them through that we are when we first see them walking through our door, which is, that is where leadership begins. It begins in that relationship with ourselves, controlling that perspective that we hold of ourselves and taking responsibility for it in a way that ensures that we get to show up in full authenticity. Because where we do, then we know we're going to be able to play our biggest impact game.
Yes. Yes.
Woohoo! I'm so inspired.
Liane, Shelley, final
So
words on this.
Mic drop.
What do you girls?
Oh, well,
where do
you
want
hit
to
the
land
nail
this
on
plane?
the head. This is relationship with self. And Paige, I love what you said about, women just choosing to see themselves as important. And I think, this speaks to, again, as Susan's mentioned, so much of our process is, and self-leadership is really about a woman being able to take ownership for the value that she brings. And when that happens, then that is a totally different way of walking through life. So yeah, there's so many similarities between, I think, what your message is, and then certainly what ours is. So Shelley, any last words from you?
No, both of you, honestly, I really don't have anything else to say, except here's one thing. I'm turning 50 in February 20th, and I have never been more sure of who I am, and more accepting of who I am. And I'm so excited to continue, to continue on the journey and just let it all go. That's, for me, based on this conversation, it's just given me more want and need to continue on that journey and to stop dropping the weight and drop the weight of other people's opinions 100%. And Paige, I just wanted to thank you, honestly, for showing all of us women, who we can be, when we want to be, and how we want to show up in our authentic selves. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank
Paige, for
you.
coming in
Thank you.
today.
Thank you all so much.
I know our audience is going to want to come and find you for damn sure, if not for a headshot, for a conversation on these very vital concepts that we explored today. So if people want to find you, where can they reach out and find you, Paige?
Oh, thank you. Yes, find me at Paige Ray Creative on Instagram. My DMs are open. I have these conversations all of the time, and it is not a conversation that it's not contingent on you doing a photo shoot. I really have a lot of conversations about, how do I just get comfortable? How do I stop worrying about it? How do I share a photo without overthinking it? We talk about a lot of things. So please feel free to DM me with your questions at Paige Ray Creative on Instagram, and paigeray.com is my website.
Yes, please go find Paige ASAP. If you are feeling this call right now and you are realizing that you got some insecurities underneath that rug that surely need to be addressed. Our famous line here at Team Elite is like, it's just so fascinating how it takes our high achievers brick walls or glass ceilings in order to awaken them to that untapped potential that exists in all of us. And so rather than waiting for the pain to be the catalyst, let's let Paige be the catalyst, right? In terms of going through this photography exercise that is actually going to help you learn how to see yourself and learn to love what it is that you see and how you show up in the world. If you're curious to learn about more in terms of how you can do that with us here at Team Elite, you can find everything that you need to in regards to how to connect with Shelley or Liane or myself over at elitehighperformance.com. This is our passion, in case you can't tell. That's why I always love to end these episodes by reminding our audience your highest potential is literally our passion, and we just can't wait to unleash it together. That includes Paige. Thank you, ladies. This has been quite the riff, and thank you everybody for tuning in. As always, remember, this is the year for co-creation on this show. So if there's anything that you want to add to this conversation, any questions you have for us on the sidelines, or suggestions in terms of where you want us to take this conversation next, don't forget, you can always reach out to me, Susan at elitehighperformance.com, via email to drop me a line. Don't forget to hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Share this episode with a friend. Help us change this collective consciousness. This is the call today. Thank you, everybody, and we will see you next week.